right, go for it. Tell me that story.
Well, when I was first at Green Gulch, one of the things that I had a bemused tolerance for was other people's obsessive behavior things, and one of them was the people who went to the altar and messed with all the things on the altar, and and then after becoming a priest, I started understanding more about ritualistic observance, and so that has ash from every place that I've practiced and little bits of sand, and that's incense ash. And what you do is you take it and you sift it, take out the dead stubs, and then put it back in and level it and put it on the altar. And there's a sweetness to dropping a lit stick of incense into it because it supports it perfectly, and it's just like.
And do you usually time your meditations to the length of an incense stick?
Yeah, yeah, it's like I know, not, so the depth of I put it in the incense, so when the glowing tip hits the edge of the rim of the container, I know that that's usually 20 minutes. You can set it up so that, the long sticks of incense are 50 minutes, which is human attention span.
Well, I like time not being held to time devices.
Right.
And I'd been meditating for 20 years doing mantra stuff.
Yeah.
And in New York, I'd hooked up with some daddy bear dude
Mm-hmm.
who said that he was into meditation. So after we had sex, I was like, hey, could we meditate together? And he was like, okay. And he had some incense sticks with him, and he measured the length by the incense stick. And he was the first person who taught me a meditation that wasn't based on doing.
Mm.
Although to a certain extent I construed it as doing, because I remember him saying, in Zen meditation you specifically sit with your eyes open, and in Theravada they usually just like, oh, close your eyes, it's easier.
Yeah.
But in Zen meditation they encourage you to keep your eyes open, and so he was like, well, traditionally we'd do this, staring at a white wall, and you just try to see through into the emptiness of everything. Or maybe that's what I construed him saying. So I made an action of being like, can I see the emptiness?
And the early instruction I got about sitting facing a wall is do not stare at the knots. They will turn into demons if you focus too much attention on them.
But he had,
you want a soft focus.
Yeah, well, and now I understand that, but he was the first person that I'd ever encountered who measured time with an incense stick.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that's a nice, I guess that might be a Zen tradition.
Well, it's traditional. It's part of what it's used for.
I'm going to rub some salve on my feet while we're talking. All right, so we'll have a little introduction. I guess you can introduce yourself. I'll ask you to add anything.
Who am I now? Among other things, well, it's an advantage of being a Buddhist, as you can say, in a previous life.
In a previous life.
And so at this point, I am, as I say in one of my profiles, I've become the man I was always attracted to.
Mm.
Sturdy, experienced, faintly bemused by the human condition. And I've been working on developing a life of joy and ease. It's and it sort of snuck up on me. I just went, well, I'll do it like this, and figured out, oh, this works. Oh, I don't have to think for the first couple hours of the day. I get up, I have a cup of coffee, I come sit and meditate, I read, I pray, I talk about the day, I fix breakfast. So I can get all the way to like 8 or 9 o'clock without
having to make decisions.
Without making decisions, right? I don't make choices. This is what I do, and it's like I learned with my wife about the dances. We do the dances of universal peace, and you have a different relationship with it if you don't make a decision that you're going to go. We went every Thursday. We still go almost every week. We find a dance and go to it, and we don't. Sometimes we'll make a decision like, okay, it rained, it froze, now there's 2 inches of snow. Is this smart to leave the house under these weather conditions? And we'll go, yes, we'd like to go, but no, this is stupid tonight. And But you have a different relationship with the dance and with practice if you don't make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
You just do it. This is what you do. And, that's, like the incense. You sift the ash and put it back in, and it holds the incense, and it's, I've got, a whole box full of sifters and measurers and powdered rice bran ash, which is near white, and I have little bits of sand from the monasteries I've practiced, and a little bit of sand from the spring that my great-grandfather discovered in North Georgia, in which he developed and put a stone in. And so before I left Georgia, I took several tablespoons of that soil, put it in my incense container, and some sand from the south of France.
Now, when you say before you left Georgia, do you mean when you first came out west, or when you went to Tennessee, or?
Well, when I realized I was leaving home, and that it was not going to be a place that was going to be my home again. My family has owned it for 5 generations. My ancestors have lived there for 20,000 years. And the smartest thing I did, my first adult choice was to stuff all my shit in a duffel bag and stand at the edge of town and stick my thumb out. It's like, transportation and a sex life. It's like hitchhiking was my boon and salvation at 17.
You were 17, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's give a little practical introduction like this. Your preferred name?
BrightHeart.
BrightHeart. And an important aspect of you to me is that you're a Leo, because I was so obsessed with Leos when I was younger, and of course when I met you, I was like instantly enamored with you, and I was like, oh, and you're a Leo.
Well, I'm actually at the very end of Cancer and 1 sun diameter from Leo at dawn on July 23rd.
So you're a 29-degree Cancer?
Yeah.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, you were the one who said this is determinative. You heal in warm water, covered in warm water, and Leos don't do this. But I have 5 planets in Leo.
And you have a Leo rising?
And
right?
Leo rising.
Yeah.
And a Virgo moon. So the aggregate is such that,
a lot of that Leo energy.
A lot of Leo, more powerfully Leo, and fucking fierce when it comes to family and, my home, and those I feel like are in my ambit of care.
Yeah, but that's 29-degree Cancer.
Yeah. And the fussy obsessiveness is the Virgo moon.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's the flavor it comes in as OCD.
OCD.
Well, it's like, if you raise 1 OCD kid, it may be an accident. You raise 2, you're part of the problem. And
I don't know. My father told me I'd never get anywhere in life if I weren't more anal retentive.
Gee. My dad told me at 16, he taught me exactly how to dig a ditch. To lay out string lines and have a story pole so that you had the right depth and so the right width, and to lay the overburden 18 inches away from the ditch itself so that you weren't stepping on it, so that when you went back to fill the ditch, you had all the material necessary to fill and slightly overfill a ditch, because there's more dirt comes out of a hole than goes back in. But you had to put it all there because it will settle.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, son, if you don't get a college education, you'll spend your life digging ditches. And the truth of it is that most of the money that I've earned in my life is because I'm really good at digging ditches. And it let me be a pot farmer in Northern California, and because I understood running water line, running water mains, digging the ditch, having it disappear. And so that ditch digging brought me my first couple fortunes. And then, after I was forcibly retired by my exes saying I was a known marijuana cultivator, I took all the skills that I'd learned growing marijuana and became a landscape gardener. Because they transfer over.
Right. Yeah.
It's all about setting up the right environment to the right the right spot in the sun and the right nutrients.
And although cannabis is a wonderful plant, it's nice to play with other plants.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they all have their slightly different needs, and I became a soil specialist. It's like, yes, this is perfect for roses. Yes, this is perfect for cannabis. Yes, this is perfect for cacti. And so I was hired by some of the first big grow operations I knew as their soil specialist. You know, that what I did was make custom soil mixes. And I got to where I could taste, oh yes, they had rice hulls in this mix. You know,
Tasting the dirt.
yeah, and oh yeah, this is a
Oh, you
calci.
mean tasting when you smoke the bud, you could taste what
Yeah,
they
I
were
can
growing
taste
it in, the growing
calciferous
matrix.
soil. Oh, this was a northeastern exposure. Oh, this was straight west and on shale. And you know, I can still taste if somebody used Miracle Grow in the first 6 weeks. 6 months later, I can taste the copper magnesium salts that the plant absorbed in the first 6 weeks. You know, it's a friend of mine, and we used to meet weekly for lunch, and he'd go to went to this wine bar, and I was like, I'll be back. I gotta go to the bathroom. And he comes back, and he says, "Oh, taste this." And I tasted it, and I went, "Yeah, Sonoma County, on the first set of ridges on the other side of the, you know, where it rises up out of the plains, and there's these limestone rocks there, and he says, you can't tell that." And I said, "I can." And he called the sommelier over, and the guy says, yeah, that's exactly where it's from. Because I could taste the west-facing slopes, and that it was still within the fog range from the San Francisco Bay. And, you know, it's like the temperature prior to harvest, if it's in certain ranges, changes the sugars.
Right. Yeah.
And I could taste that in a wine.
Now you grew up traveling. You said you had a military family?
Yeah,
right?
my father was in the military. It was he joined the army at 16 because there wasn't a girl within walking distance that wasn't a first or a second cousin. And as he explained to me, as he canceled the date with someone locally, he said, she may be a closer relative than you think. And he says, we have one certified genius and 6 congenital idiots in our family. The odds are not good. So that was the only bus ticket out of rural Appalachia when he was 16 was you went to the county courthouse, you joined the army, and they gave you a bus ticket to Atlanta to go be inducted into the army.
Wow.
And so that was his
Get out of town.
ticket to get out of town.
Yeah.
And so I had all the advantages of travel and education and wide vistas with very little of the conditioning that the military does to...
You didn't ever join any military?
No. My dad spent 22 years. That was enough for him and me both. And I think that, you know, a lot of who I am is in reaction to who my father was. And a lot of who my father was in reaction to his father. And the same back through the generations. And a lot of who my sons are is in reaction to who I am. And you know, we're from a line that matures early and thinks that we know everything. And we're also large, strong, and quick, and so we decide to be functional adults earlier than other people. You know, my grandfather was the sole support of his family. The cash he got, $1 a day from CC camps, supported his 9 brothers and sisters and the family farm. Because if you have $1 a day, it means you can go get the bolt you need to fix the wagon.
Yeah.
You know, you can go, oh, we need these, let's buy $15 worth of these seeds.
And so you're Cherokee what?
My,
or what do you think of yourself as?
what I think of myself as, you know, I think of myself as Cherokee. I have put myself down as Native American since I was first offered an independent choice. My father did not tell me of my Indian ancestry until my 18th birthday because it was something that was deeply shameful. And when he was born in the 1930s, it was against the law for a Cherokee to own land in North Georgia, for them to own their own business, to buy or sell firearms, or to testify against a white man in a capital case, or to vote.
Or to vote.
You know, and so his mother, and what I know is that my great-grandfather had 2 daughters, one before the 1900 census, one after the 1900 census, and he's listed as head of household and his 2 daughters, you know, and the so in 1900 when that census was taken, they did not list my great-grandmother because Cherokee were among the 2/3 of other people and not recorded in the census other than as a tick mark. And so after they signed the Homestead Act, which the Hedrick side of my family is was an original Cherokee land grant recipient. They got 160 acres, and that's the German side of my family. And then, my great-great-grandfather's youngest son married a, half Cherokee woman who had blue eyes. And there's the next mountain to the east is Fort Mountain, and there's 1000 AD Scandinavian-style Viking fort on top of the mountain, because there were Vikings that came there about 1000 AD and stayed. So blue eyes and facial hair in this pattern are not uncommon in the Cherokee. This is one of the descended from Vikings facial hair patterns, and even in the 1700s, the Cherokee were the only Native American group with facial hair to speak of.
Can you grow a beard on your cheeks?
Not at all. There are Italian girls with more sideburns than I have.
The first bear, the first man that I went to live with, who was my first bear as well, was from Oklahoma, and he was Scottish Cherokee Chickasaw.
Yeah.
And he had goatee, big mustache, couldn't grow on the sides of his face, and his whole body was covered in hair from the Scottish, but because he was Native American, it was jet black and straight.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I was very like, wow.
And it's like I have finally, at mid-50s, I could look down and not count every hair on my chest in a single field of view. And so it's nice to have more than I can count when I look at them. But the corners of my mustache did not fill in until my 40s. This is post-50. It's like, it's a slow process.
What age are you right now?
I'm 62? Yeah, 62.
Still a young'un. Daddy. Okay, so a couple important conversations. So you're, I don't know if professional is the right word, but maybe a master or daddy.
I've been called an ÜberDaddy.
An ÜberDaddy. You're a very skillful daddy, and as we discussed earlier, it's not like a sex role for you. It's
an embodiment.
It's an embodiment. It's a heart place. It's a duty, an obligation.
So at
vocation.
A vocation, a calling.
A calling.
So at 16, I was hanging out with my cousin, on the old family farm. My dad's brothers and sisters had pieces of the original farm. And my cousin was a hippie, and so I apprenticed to be a hippie. And as was common at the time, he moved it. His girlfriend moved in, and they got pregnant and had a kid, and without any particular planning, it was just one of those things that happened.
Miracle of life, man.
Yeah, and no birth control or thought about the matter. And so he was working as a carpenter, and so he was gone during the day. And she was a computer programmer and left for second shift. She was one of the first systems analysts that I knew, and worked for database work and systems analysis. And so she left at 4 to go to work second shift. And so they had a kid, and it's like I'd get off the bus and go over to Jimmy's house and hang with his the mother of his baby, who they didn't even they hadn't gotten around to naming her after a week, and I'm going, no, her name's Rachel, that's what I'm going to call her. And so she would be ready to go to work, and he would not be home, so I'd take care of my cousin Rachel, who, despite the fact that, what I jerked off to was men, here's this baby that smells right. It's like she smells that she's my family. I can tell I'm related to her. She smells like me. And I just fell in love with this little baby, and I went, what am I going to do with my sexual proclivities in the direction of men? And I'm going to be a daddy. It's like that's...
You had the calling to be a daddy.
And so you know, when I left home at 17, I met this wonderful man and fell in love, and we had a brief and passionate affair and a friendship that ran for 14 years.
Was he the first person you fell in love with, or had you fallen in love with girls before that?
You know, I had been enamored of girls. I had an incredibly sweet girlfriend, Alma Jean, who
Alma
I'm
Jean.
still Alma Jean. You know, a lovely, um, you know, a woman of color, and she had also been raised, you know, as a bastard by somebody else, and I was, and she very much loved me, and I thought that was wonderful, but I didn't understand what love meant until Jack pulled me into his arms. You know, and that was, I mean, she'd tried hard, but that's when it meant something, was when Jack held
it's a
me.
different thing.
And so having the experience of being loved made me understand, you know, what being an unwanted child was about. You know, was always being hungry for that. So I promised myself there would be no unwanted children in my life.
So, apart from how many you've sired, let's put it like that, how many children are you daddy to?
Well,
not children. How many people are you?
How many
daddy
people?
To?
That's a larger number. It's like the way I count. You know, it's like they call me daddy. They're mine. You know, that's the baseline. I have 2 bio kids, 2 adopted kids, 2 foster kids, 2 step kids, and assorted strays.
I think when I tell your story, I'm always like, yeah, he has like 28 kids, but only like a few of them he actually, you know,
was a bio parent.
Yeah, we're genetically related to him, but
and having had all of them, you know, it's like a couple of them, like Ethan, you know, who's not biologically mine, but I took him into my heart, and he's mine at a deeper level than some of my bio kids, you know, and you know, the foster kids, the guy I learned, you know, to be a man, you know, he was 14 and I had to figure out being a single dad, and you know, him as working for me, and you know, we learned to be men together. You know, it's an acquired set of skills. It does not come with the plumbing. You know, and as you mentioned,
and there's not necessarily good role models in this culture.
And I'm fortunate. I met. You talked about your friend who was Cherokee and Chickasaw. Well, I knew when I first went away to live at the farm in Tennessee, one of the people that was there was this guy who was Muskogee, and you know, my dad, when he saw me, went, "Oh, that guy's a Muskogee," you know, and it's just like, you know, could read his tribe, which is something I can do too. But Mark, you know, was the sheriff in our little town. You know, he'd ride around, and you know, he had a Willys Jeep, but he had to get somebody to drive because he was a high thigh amputee from Vietnam, and you know, but he'd get somebody to drive, and he was, you know, perhaps the best navigator that I've ever ridden with, because he would like feed you peeled grapes and roll you a joint, and you know, you know, and you'd arrive somewhere, and sometimes he'd say, "Oh, come out and we'll meet these folks," and sometimes he'd say, "Just sit in the car and I'll be back after a while," and then go see him have what was obviously a conversation that the other person would not want witnessed. Yeah. And then, you know, after living on the farm as a single man, I went, God, it's been 9 months since I got laid. I got to go somewhere else. And
how long did you live at the farm?
I lived there for 9 months initially.
Okay.
And then I went off to Louisville, Kentucky, and I met Maury, the man who eventually ordained me, and traveled with him out to California.
Is he who introduced you to Buddhism?
No, I had, you know, when I first went into comparative religions, I went, Buddhism sounds really neat. And then Maury and I had 4 girlfriends in common and hadn't met. You know, we'd gone through these 4 women who were all nurses at the same school in a slightly different order, and they kept saying, "You guys are a lot alike." But I would leave to go to Athens, Georgia, and he would come into town 20 minutes later, and I would come back, and he would have left the previous hour after being there all weekend. And, so it wasn't our time to intersect until Louisville, Kentucky. And we traveled together, and he gave me my first ordination. He said, most people want to be ordained, and I am ordaining you. You haven't asked, but you need the protections of being ordained. He says, you need to be able, if someone says, and when did they tell you about this? You need to be able to say, sorry about that, camera details. You need to be able to say, I'm sorry, I heard that in private. I cannot speak to that matter. And
Protections.
So
back, be comfortable, it's fine.
And he said that was my gift, was that people told me things that they had never told anyone else, and that he had watched himself do that, and watched other people tell me things that they had never told anyone else.
So, there you go, sit back, be comfortable. So, I don't know, I think important parts of your story that I think are inspiring to share is that, like, you went off hitchhiking when you were 17. You ended up living at this commune, large functional commune.
Yeah.
I mean, there was like 100 people there, right?
No, there were 300 when I first arrived,
Right, okay.
600 by the time I left the first time, and 1,200 when I returned with my wife and kid.
Wow. Yeah, so that's not one of these scrappy little communes. That
No,
really
this
takes
is
off.
the
That was
biggest intentional community that had been run, by San Francisco's finest, people who got their religious.
But in Tennessee, right?
Yeah, well, they got their mystic understanding doing LSD in San Francisco, and then went, let's go to the country and buy land in the country and follow that dream. And so they moved to Tennessee and was this big vegetarian Buddhist commune. And, back...
so the underpinning of it was Buddhist.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
So back up a little bit about how I became a Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am in rural Appalachia, an odd duck in a pond of frogs.
Right, because you had been in Europe and California.
Right,
yeah.
and a brilliant, an eidetic memory and a voracious appetite for books, and I read 700 words a minute and spent a lot of my life hiding from my life in going to easy travel to other planets by reading, and voraciously. And so I had an intellectual life, and that wasn't the milieu in which I had been plunged back of rural Appalachia. And then they said, you talk funny. Something about terminal consonants. But in the South, words do not end with D or T.
Yeah.
Fishin'. There's no G.
There's no G.
Yeah.
Mention all the R's.
Yeah. So I'm at 16. I'm, and I'd read a little bit about Buddhism, and some travelogue and some trash, and this. I'm doing what good Southern boys do in the evening, staying out of the kitchen until called for dinner. And so my dad and I are sitting and watching TV, and the local local TV announcer comes on, and this young woman, and she's like a little nervous. It's always, oh, here's my human interest appearance. Ted, done. So and she says, tonight we have a Tibetan tulka with us, a reincarnate lama. And so they pan over to this guy in orange robes and the Tibetan round face, and he's and she looks at her list of questions, and she says, modern particle physicists have determined that the nature of the universe is remarkably similar to Buddhist cosmology. What do you think of this? And he nods and smiles and says, yeah, we gave a great deal of thought to the nature of the universe 2,500 years ago, and came to these conclusions that Western science is now coming to. And I went, whoa. And then he said, since that time we've been devoting our attention to the nature of human consciousness. Are you interested in any of our discoveries about the nature of human consciousness? And I went, whoa! And I'm like up and then the interviewer turns to her clipboard and reads the next question.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you missed it! He was going to say something really important, and you missed it! But the cameraman and the people in the control booth had not missed it.
Yeah.
And they panned back to him.
Uh-huh.
And he started this slow smile, and you could go, she's young, you know, and
Yeah.
she's trying, and I wish her well. And then back to her, and she's like, it's dead air, it's, you know, and then back to him, and I could see him going, it's all right, I wish her well. And I saw him expand his wave of wishing people to be well, to hit her and then hit the camera crew and then the city of Chattanooga, and I felt the wave hit me at 22 miles away, and then I felt it wash across the south and through the whole planet and through the universe, and I went, I want to know what he knew. I
Do you remember who that was?
No.
Huh?
You know, I'm sure I could look it up, but he, you know, that was my taste of.
It's your first taste of the Dharma.
Yeah, you know, bodhicitta, the sense of, you know, we're all in here, we're all in this together, and what can I do to help?
Yeah, yeah. Which I so funny. When I was walking up the Grand Canyon, I ended up in this Dharma talk. Somebody asked me, and he's like, what did you say that was? I was, you know, he was talking about being angry at someone, and I was like, well, blah, 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 there's this thing called the Brahma Viharas, and, you know, so I end up giving this whole talk on the Brahma Viharas, and then I turned around and I was like, well, did you ever see the movie Brazil? And he was like, no, and his wife was like, I have, and I was like, there's this renegade plumber in it, played by Robert De Niro. And I love when I said that. I was like, yeah. He's like a renegade plumber, and, you know, there's a revolutionary, and the plumbers are at the front of it, and he says, you know, he says repeatedly to the main character, we're all in it together, kids.
Public health.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a plumber. That's an advantage of being a Buddhist, as you can say, in a previous life.
Yeah.
You know, I've laid block. I've been a full-time parent.
So okay, right. So the interesting like little points of your, I mean, obviously you could. So this series, I started it calling it Constant Conversations because people that I talk with constantly, but it's also something I got from Rumi. Rumi has this poem, Constant Conversation, and that's one of the ways of being with God or whatever, of experiencing the universe, is having a conversation about it. And I really see that as a meditative practice.
And our story unfolds.
Right, and so you could say a million things, but some points that I wanted to hit off is that you're somebody who knew very young that you were primarily attracted to men, but most of your long-term relationships have been with women. And they've been open, they've not been weird, closeted.
Well, most of them. There's been weird, closeted ones also. But that was...
Not since I've known you.
You're right. That one nearly killed me.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't be who I am, you know, and
well, she knew who you were. She was just
wanted me to be somebody else.
Exactly, and you were trying to.
And you know, but you know, I couldn't have imagined at 17 or 18 that there would be a time when I was out everywhere that I wanted to be. You know, I mean, I don't need to be at the dry cleaners, but except when they, you know, mess up my purple silk shirt. But you know, and like I'm happily married to a woman who, you know, and I out myself constantly, and she'll occasionally out me, and you know, and say, oh yes, my husband's queer, you know, and the way I usually describe it is I'm in a mixed marriage. I'm queer, my wife is not, and you know, because with women I have to have an emotional connection, you know.
With men, you can just have the joy of the rut. Or
right.
whatever it is.
You know, it's the parts work.
Yeah.
You know, but with women, I need to love. And you know, I love little babies, and I did not realize how much I needed to be loved until I had a stable, good relationship with a good woman and a dog that loved me, and my golden retriever and my wife taught me what I needed, how much I needed, and it took me about 3 years to believe it. You know, and what I have with her is earned, secure attachment.
Mm.
We love each other, and she's the first person that I could perceive. I've had other lovers who were delivering, but I couldn't hear it. That my happiness and well-being is as important to her as her happiness and well-being.
Mm. Mm.
You know, the good ones thought that also. The bad ones thought that what they needed was more important.
Right, right. And is your wife the second woman you've ever been married to?
No, she's like the fifth.
The fifth. Okay.
I'm a slow learner.
Whoa.
You know, Jewish girls from New York. You know, it took two of them to go, this is not working. But I have wonderful, bio kids that are quite clever, because their heritage includes Eastern European Jews and French Jews and, brilliant, quirky, Scottish, escapee Moreno Jews. So, as far as I can tell in my lineage, I'm descended from 4 different strains of people who left where they were living when they couldn't own land in their own name anymore.
Mm.
Scotch, Irish, Cherokee, and German. And a lot of small farmers. Innovative, clever small farmers. My great-grandpa did things like crop rotation and contour plowing, which everyone thought was crazy.
So you also so you're what was the word we used earlier about being a daddy? You're a vocational daddy, or what was that? You said somebody else called you something.
ÜberDaddy.
An ÜberDaddy. You're an ÜberDaddy, but you're also a good mama, which is what also, which
right.
is
It's just
you're
the
a
male
good
version
cook,
of it.
But I was going to ask you earlier when you started sewing, when you started working with fabric.
16.
At 16.
It's traditional for the two spirit people to manifest all the gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to be, it's like there are a lot of women quilters. The few men quilters tend to be really some of the best. And people with this particular set of plumbing. But if you check out the traditional stories of the northern Indian tribes, they had two spirit people who lived in a woman's role, but people could go to them and say, we need a war chief, and they would manifest as the war chief.
We need a war. Yeah, Teddy's like, we're done with this.
Teddy, come here. Crate, dug up. Crate.
We can be done with this, but.
So yeah, it's like, and how I have manifested in the world has changed throughout my life. I was, the uber, silk and velvet hippie with flowing hair, and I had all these opinions about muffins and childcare. I was.
And you were an expert tempeh maker. I remember that part of your story.
Yeah, I did soy foods, the first wave of soy foods, and taught a lot of people. And that was the wave that I was paddling out ahead of.
Mm-hmm.
I never could have imagined, that there would be soy milk in every Safeway.
Right.
It's just like, no, I wasn't prepared for complete and total acceptance, and across the U.S.
Oh wait, that sounds really interesting. How does that feel? You had mentioned earlier you didn't imagine that you'd be able to be out everywhere. You didn't imagine that soy would be you just said you weren't prepared for complete and total acceptance. How does that feel? Because also it sounds like with your wife you have complete and total acceptance.
Yeah.
Waves of complete and total acceptance.
Gosh, what a blessing.
Especially as an elder and having to fight through some of the bullshit.
Right. I paid the cost by loss of my kids for coming out. I came out, and the immediate effect was 2 of my kids were seized by legal process by their other relatives. The fact that women and men can love each other and raise kids together, I paid some of that cost. I didn't see my son Ethan for 17 years. I didn't see Brandon for 9. It's not easy. I never imagined that I would be the kind of parent that would send a check every month and otherwise have no contact with my kids. which I ended up doing. You end up becoming a lot of things that you thought, oh, I'll never do that.
Oh yeah, you told me a story last night about being wrong. Can you tell me a little bit about being what was it, the recipe for a happy and contented life? Was that the
So
words?
I was a monk living in a monastery, and
Right.
an old friend offered me, here, come to the Sufi retreat, come do dances of universal peace and sing and chant, and I went, okay, thank you, I don't have money to do that. She said, oh, it's my gift for the work you do with my son. And so I went, okay, and so I showed up, and it was like, here's this magical open community that just like welcomed me in, and I'm going, whoa, this is amazing. And then I went in and sat down, and the first words by Guy Gregory Long were, there is a path of great joy and ease in this world, and it's contained in the expression, I was wrong. And within a few months, it was like, I never imagined I would have a relationship with a woman again, much less get married, and I was wrong. I never thought that I would leave the monastery, and I was wrong. I never thought my kids would come home, which they came home for my wedding to Linda, and I was wrong. I never imagined that, I would get a graduate degree and a professional license, and I was wrong. I didn't think after I left the monastery I'd become a priest, and I was wrong. And I didn't think that I could ever have a life of joy and ease and be the same person everywhere, and I was wrong. I introduced myself as BrightHeart everywhere. At first it was just the radical fairies, and then Native American circles, and the Sufis, and pagans, and
that circle, that wave of BrightHeart was able to take in the whole of Loveland. we're in Loveland, Colorado right now. Took in the whole of Loveland and all of Colorado and all of America and the whole world
planet,
too.
Because
all beings.
May all beings be well and happy. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they have some joy and ease and comfort in this life. May they know peace. May they be well.
Well, elder, beautiful man, lover, mother, BrightHeart, thank you so much for existing and being an inspiring being.
It's lovely to have you
to have
here.
met along the path. I've known you 13 years, I guess, and it's just very good to know you're alive, and that you have lived, and that you are living. And thank you so much for your brave experience of life.
Welcome home.
Now on with our daily duties.
Yes.